What country are you attending from? This is just so that we have a feel of who we have in the room. UK, Cyprus, USA, Finland, Belgium, Turkey,
India.
Israel, India,
Slovenia.
I can see
India.
Portugal, Greece, Israel. Great, I see 33 people, 35 now. Lithuania, Oman, Japan, Saudi Arabia, Hawaii in the USA, South Africa. Brilliant. So it's great to see that we have some representation from all of these countries. Just going to move quickly to the next, but please keep going on, keep putting your things in there. And what I'll do at the end of the conference, I will take a screenshot on this and put on our social media and website as well. So keep filling in. I see 50 people have done it. Your next question is, tick the relevant role to you. Are you a nurse, midwife, other healthcare worker? Are you a student? Great. So the majority, of course, is nurses. We do have students as well. We have some midwives, academics, researchers, doctors. Brilliant. And you can see the percentages there and the breakdown of our members here today as well. We do have some other as well. Just share that in the chat with us as well. What other disciplines or fields that we have not put on this list? Just put it in the chat and we will make sure that it gets also recorded in our report. Okay, I'm going to stop here, but you can keep going. You have the link in the chat, and hopefully we will have a representation from everyone. The last message from me, for now at least, is that if you are on social media, on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, please make sure that you use the hashtag ETNAConf22. That's our hashtag for today, and we want to be trending all over the world. So please make sure that you retweet us. And let's keep having fun.
Excellent. Yes. Well, thank you, Alfonso. I'm now going to try and share my screen so that we can. There it is. That's good. Okay. So as you can see, this is the first online conference that we're having as an ETNA organization. Before I go any further, I want to formally welcome you all, and on behalf of ETNA and also on behalf of the Research Center for Transcultural Studies in Health at Middlesex University, who is hosting this conference, and and from me, I'm Professor Rena Papadopoulos. I am the head of the Research Center for Transcultural Studies in Health and the host and chair of this conference. So I want to say that we have 36 countries. All members of ETNA come from 36 countries. I want to say a few things about ETNA before I do before we move on. I wanted to say that ETNA started. Oops, no, I'm just trying to find my presentation. Let's see. Yeah, so we have a really nice number of keynote speakers, and we have given them a really hard job to do, to present their work in 10 or 15 minutes. So They will tell you their details are on the screen, but also hopefully you have accessed the brochure and you have read about them and their abstracts as well. So the title of our conference is Global Nursing, Midwifery and Social Care Responses and Challenges to COVID-19 pandemic during 2020 and 2021. So they're all going to be giving us, and because we called it global, we use that term, actually our keynoters represent 5 continents. So we have Mavis and Roina, the 2 first speakers. They come from South Africa, so they are from the continent of Africa. Then we have Brynel, who is from India. Then is me, and then we have Kathy from Australia. And lastly, but not leastly, of course, is Azita from North America, from the University of Washington. So just a very, very quick kind of introduction. A little bit about, as I said, about ETNA. The mission of ETNA is to establish through cooperation among all members and experts, the exchange and the development of cultural and transcultural knowledge. ETNA is committed, of course, to equitable quality care, human rights, and culture competent care for everybody. The goals, these are kind of like the summary version of what we have in the website, is to promote, advance, and disseminate transcultural nursing research, education, and practice, to explore the nature of cultural competence, its development and evaluation, because we're doing a lot of investigation, but we haven't really evaluated many of these things, to contribute to improvements in the provision of culturally competent care throughout Europe and beyond. And of course, we do not charge membership in this organization, and we have about 450 members, as I said, from all over the world, from 36 countries from all over the world. What we do is we have a website where we put a lot of information on. We do regular bulletins. We also have a repository for published articles, and I would remind you all that to send us, if you're publishing articles or books or anything that is relevant to this topic, to allow us to publicize it and to include it in the repository of the organization. And also, we have been conducting conferences every 2 years, and a lot of people follow the conferences, and I will say a little bit more about the conferences in a minute. So this is the last bit of information about the history of ETNA. It was actually established in 2005. The first president was Bruno Ciancio from Italy, and the current president for a few years now is me. The first conference was held in Turkey in 2008, and I was actually wearing this blouse at that conference when I was doing my keynote. So I found it and I thought I will, a symbolic kind of connection between the beginning and where we are now. The host at in Turkey was Chandan Öztürk. I don't know if she's in the audience, but I hope she is. The second conference was in Ireland in 2011, and our host was Kathleen Marquis. The third one was in Israel, as you can see the dates there, and we were hosted by Sarah Nassim. The fourth was in Hungary, and our dear friend Katalin Paps is the one who has the group of students watching us as we speak on a big screen now. The fifth one was in Denmark, and we were hosted by Dorothy Nielsen. And the last real face-to-face conference was the sixth conference, which was in the Czech Republic. And I see that Valerie is in the audience. Thank you all for your commitment to ETNA and for your contributions. Now, we planned and we were about to deliver a conference in 2020 in Gran Canaria in Spain, but the COVID kind of took over and we had to cancel it. So therefore, we decided now to do this. We're calling it the 8th conference, which is this on the first online one as well. So before I move on to this, I wanted to also say hello and acknowledge the members of the ETNA board. So you met Alfonso, who is the secretary, and me, the president. The vice president of ETNA is Christiana Kuta from Cyprus. We have a treasurer with no money, is because we don't charge or whatever, but we aspire to find some money at some point to help people who might want to come to one of our conferences and do other things, but at the moment. So Sarah Nassim, who is from Israel, is our treasurer. Our events coordinator is Dorothy Nielsen from Denmark. The digital communication is Sean, who is here and looking after us with the technology. And we also have an honorary member who is Maria Jose Morales. I hope she's in the audience because she was going to host the 7th conference that actually got cancelled. Okay, so I think that's all I want to say for the moment. So I would like to invite Mavis, Professor Mavis Moloitsi to give her presentation, please. Thank you. I'm going to stop sharing, or maybe you can do it as Sean. You okay, Mavis?
Yes, I'm trying to share my screen. Good afternoon, everyone. Can you see my screen?
No.
Okay, let me try again.
I mean, if you want Sean to do it and then just says next slide, that's all.
Yeah, I think Sean, can you do it for me? I think I'll waste time.
Yes, it's a tight ship today.
Yeah, considering that we have just been given 10 minutes. I just want to say welcome from South Africa. My name is Mavis Moraudzi, and I'll be sharing with you the reflections on the lessons learned on the impact of COVID-19 pandemic to the nursing profession in South Africa. I'll be looking at this from the lens of Ubuntu perspective. Sean, next slide. Ubuntu perspective, while he's going to the next slide, Ubuntu is African, it comes from an African idiom which says umuntu ngumuntu ngabantu. A person is a person through other persons. So when this pandemic really hit South Africa, that is the time that we really saw that indeed we are a country which is really practicing Ubuntu in all respect. So the next slide is talking about what exactly am I going to present about. I'm going to talk about the introduction, community sensitization, challenges faced by nurses during the pandemic, changes in nursing education, and lastly, the conclusion. And in my introduction, next slide, I just wanted to say, indeed, in 2020 brought new challenges to healthcare in general and in healthcare management. For us in developing country, our systems, our healthcare system were already ailing with a lot of challenges. And the pandemic really exacerbated the situations, which as is. South Africa was not exempted from the negative impact of COVID-19 pandemic. However, we still feel that we were very fortunate because our government acted promptly by introducing the state of emergency and public health measures such as hand washing, use of sanitizers, social distancing, wearing of masks, and restrictive visitation in hospitals, just to mention a few. And based on that, I really think they were able to manage the pandemic very well. The incident management teams were formed, which really assisted in managing and reporting the spread of the infection. So this paper will highlight some of the lessons learned during this process. Next slide, please. Indeed, as I said, I'm looking at it from the Ubuntu perspective. A person is a person through other persons. So we saw how the community was sensitized about this condition and the critical role played by WHO, ICN, and other stakeholders. There was a lot of global sharing of information through proper channels. And I think the social media also played a very critical role because by the time we had the pandemic hit us in South Africa, we already know what is going on in other countries. And there was a lot of sharing of information that was going on through Facebook, WhatsApp, and all those social media. Indeed, some of the information was not evidence-based, but I think it really helped a lot to share that information. Indeed, the importance and the value of Ubuntu philosophy in combating some of the issues that we faced as nurses really assisted us a lot because during this period, we realized how the community was sensitized about the disease and how everyone took responsibility because each and every person felt that I have to take responsibility so that I must not infect another person. And that is the principles of Ubuntu. Therefore, there was solidarity in the whole country. There was participatory decision-making and a sense of belonging and consensus about us helping each other in many issues. For example, wearing of masks, social distancing, everyone was really cooperating because we all felt that we are supposed to do good things so that we can help the other person. Next slide, please. Yes, indeed, there was community mobilization, but nevertheless, nurses felt a lot of challenges. The majority of nurses felt unprotected because at the beginning, more especially during the first phase, we realized that we were not so well prepared. So there was lack of personal protective equipment. People were really, the nurses were really suffering. And fortunately enough, there was a lot of noises that was made through nursing organization, nursing associations, and so on, so that the government could really assist in making sure that there are personal protective equipment. There was extreme staff shortage, and that also assisted a lot because nurses were appointed temporarily to assist in the pandemic. And indeed, we realized that there was a slow progression of disaster preparedness, both in public and private. However, due to the noise that was made in the community, we also had to find ways of how do we ensure that we protect the nation by making sure that we are prepared. All those things really caused a lot of mental exhaustion among nurses and even death. So a large number of nurses died during the process. And this was not only about nursing as a profession, because nurses also live in the community. They had a lot of challenges, like physical, psychological, and social challenges, lack of transport, because there was no transport that was allowed to move, public transport that could move them from their place of stay to work. So that was also a challenge that they were faced with. The stigma of saying there is a nurse who is going to work every day, she can bring the infection to us. And those were some of the things that nurses really experienced. And they themselves were afraid of contracting the disease. So that was also some of the challenges. And there was also lack of enough information regarding the disease, although the ongoing research was going on. Next slide, please. Yes, indeed, that was in nursing practice and nursing management. And we remember very well that in nursing management, during that period, nurses were sick most of the time, and they were also isolated. So the nurse managers also felt pressure. However, the other people that felt so much pressure were nurse educators, because there was a lot that they had to adapt to. Technology and e-learning was something that we were still talking about, but it was not really being practiced in most of the colleges and the universities. Both learners and nurse educators had a challenge. And to make things worse is also the issue of infrastructure. The internet is not so good in such a way that people could be able to study freely at home. And internet is still data is still very expensive in our country. And the issues of clinical practicals, how was the students supposed to be doing practicals under those situations? And how were nurse educators supposed to adapt new methods to ensure that there is clinical practice that is going on? Those were the challenges that were really experienced during that particular time. And patients were not supposed to come to hospitals, but they needed treatment, they needed consultation. So online consultation was also a challenge, because issues like telehealth is something that we are not yet practicing. We were not practicing at that particular time. So those were the new issues that had to come up. Next slide, please. Yes, indeed, there was a lot of lessons that we learned during this period. The first lesson was that we have to have disaster management preparedness at all times, even during the pandemic, or even if we don't have a pandemic. But as a country, we realize that yes, we have it in paper, but because we have never found ourselves in this situation, we were really fumbling, we're not really very good in what we were doing. But from this pandemic, I think we have learned that we need to be prepared for disaster at any time. And the issues of health inequity were really, really coming to the fore, because we realize that we live in a country that has got both the haves and the have-nots. So during this time, things, you could easily see how difficult things were. The improvement of the curriculum and training of health professionals, I think that is something that we realize, well, yes, as much as we think we're a developing country, we are still not so well developed, because we didn't have enough technology to continue with the teaching as we expected. The issues of provision of health education to the community it was really very, very important that it be done at that particular time, but the different media had some people didn't have access to those media that we were trying to use. And that shows how unequal our society was. And the improvement of availability of human resource, those were some of the things that had to be, that we have learned, that we need to have a staff for us to be able to render quality care. Collaboration between public and private hospitals. We have never been collaborating, but during this pandemic, we realized how important for that public and private hospitals have to work together. And in that way, they also have to find a way of how are they going to accommodate people who do not have money, people who are still not having medical aid. And during this pandemic, we learned as a country that it is doable and people can really get access to private hospitals, even if they don't have money. Public choices and accessibility of vaccination. And I think that is also a very good lesson that we have learned, that when the public know and when the public are well informed, they will be able to make choices. They can even advocate further for people to take treatment. Let's pass that one. The most important thing was the community mobilization. Our president used to have meetings with the whole country. We call them the Imbizos family meeting. And that was to garner support from the community. And that really helped a lot because we all waited that the president is going to be talking to us tonight about the pandemic. And I really think that was something that was really very beautiful, and it helped us as healthcare professionals, and the information was well disseminated countrywide. The role of the nursing association, we realized how important are the nursing associations, because they really worked very hard to ensure that nurses are taken care of, PPEs are made available and all that. Indeed, it was the year of the nurse in 2020. But what I would like to make everybody aware of is that never in my history as a nurse, I've been a nurse for the past 40 years now, but I have never seen nurses being appreciated by the community the way we have been appreciated during this particular period. And I think we need to up our game and make sure that we continue doing good so that people can see nursing as a career and as a profession. There was indeed the issues of the use of the technology and the media. I think we shared best practices globally, and I think that was also a lesson that we have learned, that we need to use technology more, use of evidence-based research. Next slide. In conclusion, I just want to say to all the nurses that are listening here, we have taken nursing to the higher level, but we need to adapt as a nursing profession, because what we have learned during this pandemic is that indeed we are the heart of the healthcare. And indeed, there is a lot that people can learn from us. We need to be involved in decision-making and policy-making so that we can be able to support nurses to work in positive working environment. Marketing and profiling of nursing as a profession really took place during this period. And I think we are going to attract a large number of young nurses to join the profession. Yes, we need to ensure that technology mediated care is promoted, because we are now living in the 21st century, and the technology is the way to go. And lastly, I just want to say to all of you, let us strengthen the Ubuntu, the togetherness, the solidarity, the collectivism that we have seen, that the power of many can really change the situation. I thank you.
Sorry, Renan, you are on mute.
I did my speech and I was on mute. I was saying thank you for the amount of information that useful information that we've had from Mavis, and the wise words as well about the things that we need to be doing better and the things that we haven't done so good. So thank you so much. Can I ask now Roina to make her presentation? Do you
Thank
want?
you, Prof. I need Sean to share my slides, please. Thank you so much, Sean. My presentation is about South Africa during the peak of COVID-19 pandemic from the midwifery perspective. Next slide, Sean. Okay, you can go to the next slides again. So this is the outline of my presentation. I will focus on the introduction, the response to the pandemic, challenges versus lessons, and the conclusion. Next slide. Okay, this slide is about how COVID-19 emerged in South Africa. It was March 2020 when South Africa was confronted with the emergence of COVID-19 pandemic. As Prof has indicated, the health system was taken by surprise. There was no time to prepare for healthcare facilities, and the nurses, doctors, and midwives in terms of what to do and how to care for positive cases of COVID-19. Everyone, including healthcare providers, feared the COVID-19 because South Africa usually, we were blessed in terms of pandemics for some years, hence COVID-19 came as a surprise to every one of us. So amid of the fear of COVID-19, the nation rapidly landed at the peak of the first wave of COVID-19, where now they have to go to alert level 5 lockdown restrictions, which the country benchmarked from other international countries, including the guidelines from the World Health Organization. So apart from that, during the process of COVID-19 level 5 lockdown restrictions, we had pregnant women who did not know where to go to receive the care that it was supposed to be very safe and of high quality for them and their unborn babies. Pregnant women with medical aid went to private practice, and those who did not have medical aids did not have any choice. They had to go to public healthcare facilities for help. So midwives were confronted with series of COVID-19 questions, which they were not even ready to answer because of very little knowledge that was known about the COVID-19 pandemic. So despite having the little information, they remained resilient and worked as frontliners to protect pregnant women against COVID-19 infections. Even though everyone was expected to maintain social distancing as one of the regulations of COVID-19, it was very challenging for midwives to maintain social distancing because they had to assess comprehensively, diagnose and intervene and make sure that they prevent complications. On the other hand, pregnant women still expected that respectful maternity care As a result, midwives, some of them tested positive with COVID-19, some succumbed to the infection, which further led to shortage of staff. Next slide. Okay. In response to the pandemic, the health system established some maternity wards. Some were were just special for COVID-19 cases. Clinical guidelines were also developed in the process and implemented. There were temporary posts, midwifery posts that were created. Retired midwives were also called back to the service in order to try and add to the and combat the shortage of staff. Then private midwives had to take larger number of pregnant women, and they had to work 24 hours tirelessly. And in addition to that, pregnant women were also encouraged to vaccinate in the process, and health advices were also given through social media platforms. So in the process, midwifery clinical training was also affected due to congestion in the healthcare facilities, which limited the clinical learning opportunities of students. This also led to delays in completion of their training. In terms of theory classes, they were done online, which was a challenge to both the students and the midwifery lecturers, because they were used to do face-to-face teaching before COVID-19. So they had to be creative and ensuring that students still get that quality clinical lessons, and also by using the simulation laboratories to demonstrate skills and preparation for real life situations. In other institutions, special concessions were made in order to extend the training of students up to June 2021. This was done to allow them to complete their clinical hours and clinical workbooks according to the South African Nursing Council rules and regulations, and to ensure that even in the midst of COVID-19, as midwives, we need to maintain that strong ethics that is within legal and professional foundation. Some midwives had to start their own practice. Some they left their usual services and plan to start their new midwifery private practice, in trying to add to the healthcare facilities that were already congested. Next slide. So about the challenges, majority of the challenges are the ones that Prof already spoke about. It includes unpreparedness of the nation and the healthcare system, infrastructure, shortage of human and financial resources, including PPEs, and delayed completion of midwifery training. So based on that, as midwives, we had to plan ahead to make sure that we are ready for the future pandemics. We had to transform the way of doing things, and doing that, we had to identify the needs for transformation. Some of the needs of the transformation was to try and involve traditional birth attendants in the care of pregnant women, and then and also to make sure that every nurse has midwifery qualification in South Africa. This is evident in the new curriculum, in the new postgraduate programs that we are facing in, as we are busy phasing out the legacy qualifications. So as part of the minimum requirements, every candidate is expected to have a midwifery qualification, of which is a good plan that will assist in the addition of a shortage of staff during the pandemic and in the future. So learning spaces are also expected to be reshaped, where we also need to go technology, which is more of 4IR, that will assist in the training, clinical training of midwives during the future pandemics. And more research needs to be conducted also, so that we get more information and planning on how to face the new pandemics in future. This will assist us to avoid the surprises that we had during the new pandemic in 2020. We also need to decolonize the midwifery curriculum to ensure that we put in information related to COVID-19 so that our midwifery students get quality information during training in preparation of the future pandemics. Next slide. So in conclusion, I just want to say the ultimate goal for all these plans is to make sure that the midwifery care that we provide to our women and babies are for saving their lives, protecting them, and preventing complications in the midst of any type of pandemics that we might meet in the future. Next slide. I thank you. Any question?
Rena, you're on mute again.
I should leave it open all the time. Sorry, Rena, we will have the questions at the end so that we need to move to the next presentation, but thank you ever so much because it was really very interesting to see how midwifery and pregnant women and newborns and all the issues related to that. We tend to talk more about nursing, but obviously midwifery is, and I appreciate it very much that you have given us this presentation, and hope that more midwives will join the ETNA, even though it says nursing, but it is really broader than nursing. We have people from all of the health and social care professions, and as I said, it's not even European, is now global. So a little bit of an advert there. So now I am inviting Prunell to go ahead with her presentation because we need to catch up a little bit of time. Thank you very much. Off you go.
Yeah. So my presentation is visible, no?
Yes, it's lovely.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. So let me begin by thanking you, Irina, for inviting me to speak at today's mini conference that has been organized by the European Transcultural Nursing Association. It's an honor to be here and to be part, of a process which has people from different parts of the world. And I'm here today to talk about the COVID pandemic and anti-minority bias in healthcare services in India. Okay, it's 8:18 now, so I will hopefully complete my presentation within the allotted time. So as we all know that the COVID-19 pandemic, it was not only a health crisis, but it is also a humanitarian and development crisis, and its impact is going to be felt for a long, long time. And the pandemic essentially exposed the fault lines and fissures in our society. And I will be talking to you about how the specific context of anti-minority bias that one saw in the context of the COVID pandemic in relation to health services in India. This is very briefly some facts. The first case of COVID-19 was reported in India on 27th of Jan 2020. And this was a person from Kerala, which is a southern, a state in southern India. And as of date, okay, as of 22nd of March, we have about 43 million COVID cases. And the number of deaths, we have about 500,000 deaths, 517,000 deaths. But there are many studies that claim that this is a large, there has been a large underreporting of COVID-19 deaths in many states, both in the first and second wave. And there are complex reasons for it, which we can't go into right now. And that the actual COVID toll could be 6 times the reported figures. So somewhere around 3.2 million. And we also, the vaccination drive, commenced on 21st of Jan 2021, and about 1.81 billion persons have been covered by vaccination so far. 1 minute. Now, the COVID pandemic in India caused basically unleashed a dramatic economic collapse and was also a human catastrophe. And unfortunately, the most destructive outcomes did not result from the trajectory of the disease, but from the nature of the government response. Early into the pandemic, the government imposed a national lockdown. It was on March 24th, 2020. That was the most stringent in the world. And curfew-like regulations confined people to their homes, preventing most economic activity and prohibiting movement other than for limited specific tasks. And it really triggered off a humanitarian crisis because there was no, the government largely focused on the public health response, but did very little in relation to psychosocial support and food security. And in April 2020, the country witnessed the greatest exodus since India's partition due to the coronavirus. Now, the second wave also was extremely severe in India, and this largely, happened because the government was caught napping. So there was a certain complacency that stepped in because the numbers in India were still, manageable compared to what was happening in the West, the number of infections and deaths that were taking place in Europe and America. And there was, there was a policy paralysis, and the second wave was very, very severe. There were severe consequences in the form of spiraling cases, reduced supplies of essential treatment, oxygen, hospital beds, and you saw the private sector, profiteering. You saw major profiteering on everything, on hospital beds, on oxygen, on essential treatment, drugs, and you saw increased deaths, particularly in the young population. Now, we all know, okay, and now we'll talk about COVID-19 and stigma. We all know that pandemics, especially those of infectious diseases, have a historical relationship with stigma and prejudice. The bubonic plague, the HIV pandemic, the Middle East respiratory syndrome, and the Ebola outbreak. All of them have been associated with polarization, racism, blame against certain ethnicity or occupations like sex workers and communities, the gay, for example, the gay community. The HIV, the human immunodeficiency virus was even labeled as the gay plague. Okay, now the COVID pandemic in India, soon acquired deep political, racist, communal, and casteist overtones. There were derogatory nomenclature such as Chinese virus or Corona jihad. Jihad is a war. A lot of us who are, engaging on the issue of, Islamophobia would understand this term. And these terms and these nomenclatures became part of a disjunctive politics of representation. And you saw a systematic targeting and violence against people from the Northeast, Muslims and migrants, the latter during the first and to some extent even in the second wave. Northeasterners who have Mongoloid features were kind of spat on, denied entry into shops, called coronavirus, and expelled from rented apartments. And this naked prejudice, saw university students in some cities return home in fear and panic, and many of them were actually very vulnerable because they were traveling in in crowded trains or flights, and and therefore also exposing themselves not only to violence because of prejudice but also COVID infection. And the COVID-19 pandemic exposed the fault lines and fissures within society. So the virus in India soon acquired a race, a religion, and a class, and therefore was not the great equalizer, in a manner of speaking, that it was touted to be. Now, in the case of Muslims, which is a very significant minority group in India, you saw both prejudice and political factors playing a key role, and they were the key drivers of stigma and discrimination. And this was aided by fake news and videos and biased reporting by certain sections of the media. India was already in ferment around this time over the Citizenship Amendment Act, which was for the first time, basically going to exclude Muslims. The Citizenship Amendment Act talks about citizenship for people seeking refuge from countries in South Asia, say Pakistan, Nepal, Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh, and for the first time, Muslim refugees from these countries were sought to be excluded. So it was also a way of excluding, discriminating on the base of religion, and there was a huge movement all over the country against that. And in Delhi, in Shaheen Bagh in Delhi became in that sense iconic for Muslim women coming out and protesting against religion-based discrimination in the context of citizenship. And of course, this also led, the entire protest and the politicization also led to riots in Delhi, which happened in February 2020. And it was in this situation that the Tablighi Jamaat, which is a Muslim religious gathering which had taken place, and there were, of course, about 3,000 to 4,000 people who had gathered, and many of them came from within the country, many of them came from outside country, even from countries which were COVID hotspots. And of course, they all came with legitimate visas and permissions. But this thing got extremely politicized, and because the Delhi government had issued notice about not having large gatherings, but this thing evidently was planned, and of course the organizers were irresponsible, but neither did the government do take any preemptive steps, and or also but the entire issue got extremely politicized, and the government of India, so you see for the first time a national government, blaming the Tablighi Jamaat for the spike in the number of positive cases in the country, because many people who attended this religious gathering obviously then went on, went back to their hometowns, and you saw the number of cases, okay? It went on to say that the rise in cases at this time, should not be seen as a national trend, and warned that the number of cases may rise due to negligence and careless. And you can see here the Joint Secretary of the Health Ministry very categorically saying that the main reason for increased numbers of cases is that members of the Tablighi Jamaat have traveled all over the country. Now, this was, it was really premature to talk about a national trend, because the country's testing policy was still evolving, testing facilities were still being ramped up, the private sector was only just permitted to undertake testing, and testing was also, very, very cost prohibitive. There was also, the government had delayed its response regarding bans on travel and religious congregations. There was no universal airport screening and extremely low testing rates. Now, all of this was happening, and therefore it was very wrong for the government to hold this particular event. So we were really not getting a complete and clear picture. And many experts, in fact, felt that testing that was happening at that point in time was absolutely inadequate, and then probably community transmission was already going on and was being undetected. Then you see Muslims being and the Tabligis being accused of Corona jihad, and they were reprimanded for spreading the highly contagious disease. The entire community was accused of plotting against the nation, in line with the usual narrative of the Muslim as anti-national. And of course, the media, frenzy that ensued, and the media had really played a very, very negative and destructive role. You saw, and this also contributed to potentially sick people getting criminalized, and Muslims were targeted in many parts of the country. They were denied healthcare, asked to produce certificates to be able to seek healthcare, faced economic and social boycott, violence, etc. Muslims were humiliated, harassed, socially and economically boycotted, and even lynched. Okay, you also saw that WHO stepped in to say that having COVID was not anybody's fault, and there should be no profiling of cases on the basis of racial, religious, and ethnic lines. Then finally, on 8th April, the government issued an advisory to address social stigma associated with the COVID-19 pandemic. So you see the government first creating a situation of panic and scare, and engaging in selective targeting. And then it issued, and when it realized that the situation was really getting out of hand, and now the international community was watching it, it basically issued an advisory urging people not to label any community or area for the spread of the virus. Now, all of this is, there's too much, there's very little time, but, India is going through a lot of political churning. And this discrimination, violence, and disinformation against Muslims has an extensive historical and political context, both in India and the diaspora. Just as violence and misinformation against social groups such as Ahmadis, Christians, and Hindus is a problem in neighboring Pakistan. And you see that this long-standing Islamophobia in India kind of converges with anxieties over the coronavirus, and becomes really, really problematic for a section of India's minorities. And since 2014, we have a Hindu nationalist government, and so you're seeing wide-scale, hyper-nationalism and majoritarianism, which is also, there's a systematic project of hate and othering of the Muslim and also Christians, which is leading to increased targeted violence in this new political environment. So what was the health sector response? Because, it's important to understand, and there is enough of studies about this, that, how the health sector is not immune, and physicians, nurses, community health workers are not immune to injustices on account of race or caste or class or gender or sexuality. Okay, because obviously healthcare providers come from the same society that everybody else lives in, and where all these structural injustices prevail. So you see here that and in India there has also been historically a lot of prejudice and bias within the healthcare system against Muslims, who are seen to be having large family sizes, not very hygienic, and things like that. And so the health sector response was basically, you saw pregnant Muslim women being refused to enter government hospitals. Then you saw women being asked to clean up their own, blood, after delivery. There was this case in Fawzia Shaheen, who was in labor pain and was turned away from the private nursing home that she was going for regular antenatal care, and also later denied admission at another, tertiary care hospital. You saw Valentis, a cancer hospital in UP, issuing an advertisement saying that Muslim patients and their caregivers were required to provide test results to show they are negative for COVID-19 before getting admitted. And the US Committee on International Religious Freedom expressed concern following reports of a hospital in the state of Gujarat segregating patients on the basis of religion. Then there was this Oxfam study which showed that almost 33% of Muslims and 20% of Dalits and tribals are indigenous persons, and Dalits are what is historically known as, they're an oppressed group that has been historically been considered untouchables. Okay, so they have faced discrimination in accessing healthcare. In Mumbai, you've seen many Muslim women who felt that there was a difference in the way in how public health facilities, the staff of public health facilities spoke to them, following, and this was not just doctors, nurses, and other professionals also, or healthcare workers after the Tablighi Jamaat incident. So health professionals in some parts of the country openly denied medical care to Muslims in violation of the Hippocratic Oath. And this skewed, we see this, and this is globally known, that skewed power dynamics with respect to class, caste, race, religion, gender, sexuality between healthcare providers and patients deepen existing structural inequalities in the healthcare systems and present a formidable barrier to healthcare access. So my last few slides is, what are the implications for all of this? So of course, the fear of being marginalized and socially marginalized and stigmatized as a result of a disease outbreak, often leads to people to deny early clinical symptoms and may contribute to their failure to seek timely medical care. And many of the community activists from the Muslim community and also health rights activists fear that the targeting would discourage early reporting of COVID-19, especially those from the lower strata of the Muslim society. And, then community activist leaders also felt that the mistrust with the state and public health institutions kept many Muslims from seeking care when they had symptoms of COVID. And some doctors from the community also invite patients to actually treat for typhoid and malaria. And if those were ruled out, then to assume it was COVID. So you see a lot of delayed care, unreported cases, taking place. And there was also this perception among patients that a COVID positive test result would mean that the entire family would be quarantined. And so people were so afraid of the hostility that, that they had heard about and read about, that they preferred to die at home rather than to encounter such hostility in a hospital. And they preferred to seek health care from the private sector as they experienced pervasive bias in public healthcare institutions, and they feared further stigma and discrimination. So the private sector, is expensive all over the world, and therefore you see these, middle income, lower middle income, poor Muslim families taking hefty loans and mortgaging their gold jewelry in order to pay for care. They also preferred to be privately managed. Doctors were not notifying their illnesses to the authorities. And there were, fears about vaccination, that people will die in a couple of years. So even access to information and correct information was a big challenge. There was a fear of importance, or there was a tendency to deny that there was any pandemic, and to see it against the vaccine as a conspiracy against Muslims to control their populations. You also had people purchasing, and this is not only from the in relation to the Muslim community, but other communities also purchasing fake vaccine certificates. So just, to conclude, a caste, race, gender, sexual identity, religion, ethnicity, and, class create conditions of vulnerability and risk and affect access to healthcare, and also lead to poor health outcomes, even in normal times, okay? And we've seen that how pandemics have the ability and the unique ability to amplify existing health inequalities. We've seen this all over the world, disproportionately affecting socially disadvantaged groups. Okay, and often people with illnesses, people who have been associated with the illness are discriminated against, socially isolated, and their human rights are violated. However, when pandemics occur in times of hyper-nationalism, anti-minority bias, shrinking democratic spaces, and threats to fundamental rights, as we are seeing in India right now, then the implications for health, well-being, and survival of the community or the communities under siege is dire. The implication for disease control and public health is also dire, and the implication for social justice and citizenship rights are also dire. And my last slide is these recommendations that stigma and discrimination should be an integral part of a public health response right from the beginning, and not something that is put in place as a reaction to discriminatory and stigmatizing events. Okay, and the state's role in perpetuating or in facilitating or in reinforcing stigma and discrimination must be critically examined. The state is a duty bearer and should be seen as upholding the health rights and citizenship rights of all citizens, and not targeting, as our friends from South Africa said, the pandemic should have been in many ways a test for solidarity, for a non-sectarian nationalism. But in the initial days of the COVID outbreak in India, that was not the case. And we need national and state policies and laws to address stigma and discrimination. We need more research on stigma and discrimination in the context of pandemic, okay, and how it affects health seeking and access to healthcare. Medical associations, nursing associations, and hospital associations should put in policies against stigma and discrimination. And of course, the judiciary has an important role to play in upholding the rights of citizens and vulnerable groups. Thank you so much.